Sarah Martinez never imagined that walking through the gates of Westfield Academy would change not just her life, but the entire social structure of one of America's most prestigious private schools. What started as whispered rumors about this scholarship kid would soon explode into a revelation that left teachers speechless, students stunned, and bullies scrambling to apologize. Sometimes the quiet girl sitting alone at lunch holds secrets that could reshape everything you think you know about power, privilege, and what it truly means to belong. This is the story of how one teenager's hidden identity turned a school's cruelest targeting campaign into the most humbling lesson of their lives. The truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, and for Sarah, that moment would come in the most dramatic way possible, in front of the entire school, changing not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself. The September morning air was crisp as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the modest Honda Civic, clutching her worn backpack against her chest. Westfield Academy loomed before her like a castle from another world, its red brick buildings and manicured lawns speaking of old money and older traditions. Students streamed past her in designer clothes, carrying bags that cost more than her family's monthly grocery budget. Sarah's mother, Maria, squeezed her daughter's shoulder through the car window. "Remember what we talked about, Mija. Keep your head up and focus on your studies. This opportunity is a gift." Maria's voice carried the weight of countless extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, sacrifices made to supplement the partial scholarship that made Westfield Academy possible. As the Honda pulled away, Sarah felt the curious stares of other students like pinpricks on her skin. She had practiced this moment in her head dozens of times during the summer, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of being surrounded by teenagers who carried themselves with the casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. The main hallway of Westfield Academy was a showcase of achievement and privilege. Trophy cases lined the walls, filled with awards dating back decades. Oil paintings of distinguished alumni gazed down from their gilded frames, and Sarah recognized several faces from newspapers and television. This was a school that had produced senators, CEOs, and celebrities. And now, somehow, it was her school, too. Her first class was advanced literature, and Sarah slipped into a seat near the back, hoping to blend into the background. The other students chatted easily about summer vacations in Europe and family estates in the Hamptons. She pulled out her notebook, one she had bought from the dollar store, and carefully covered with contact paper to hide the cheap binding. "So we have a new student," announced Mrs. Wellington, the literature teacher, as she noticed Sarah. "Would you like to introduce yourself to the class?" Every head turned toward Sarah, and she felt her cheeks burn. "I'm Sarah Martinez," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying to the front of the room. "Where are you from, Sarah?" Mrs. Wellington asked kindly. "Downtown," Sarah replied, deliberately vague. She didn't mention the cramped apartment above the bodega where she lived with her mother and younger brother, or the fact that she had to take 2 buses to get to school each morning. After class, Sarah made her way to the cafeteria, a grand space with vaulted ceilings and long wooden tables that looked like something from a medieval feast hall. She bought the cheapest lunch option and found an empty table in the corner, opening a book to discourage conversation. That's when she first noticed them watching her. A group of girls at a nearby table were whispering and glancing in her direction. At the center of the group sat Madison Ashworth, whose family name was on one of the buildings. Madison had the kind of effortless beauty that came from good genetics and better skincare, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. She was everything Sarah wasn't: wealthy, confident, and completely at home in this world of privilege. "Did you see her shoes?" Sarah heard one of the girls whisper, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "They're from Payless. My housekeeper shops there." Madison's laugh tinkled like wind chimes, but there was something sharp underneath it. "Well, we should be welcoming to our scholarship students. It's what distinguishes us from the public schools, after all." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Somehow, they already knew she was there on financial aid. In a school where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary, Being a scholarship student marked her as fundamentally different, less than. Over the following days, the targeting began in earnest. It was subtle at first, the kind of exclusion that adults rarely notice, but cuts teenagers to the bone. Sarah would approach a group working on a project only to be told it was full, even though they clearly needed more people. Invitations to study groups mysteriously never reached her. Her locker was repeatedly accidentally bumped into, sending her books scattering across the hallway floor. Madison seemed to be the orchestrator of it all, though she never did anything overtly cruel. Instead, she perfected the art of the backhanded compliment and the casual put-down disguised as concern. "Oh, Sarah, you're so lucky to be here," Madison said one day after English class, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I mean, it must be such an adjustment from wherever you came from. If you ever need help understanding how things work here, I'm happy to explain." The other girls in Madison's circle giggled, and Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment. She wanted to say something cutting in return to defend herself, but the words stuck in her throat. This was exactly the kind of situation her mother had warned her about, telling her to keep her head down and not make waves. But keeping her head down was becoming increasingly difficult as the harassment escalated. Someone put gum in her hair during chemistry class, forcing her to cut out a chunk with scissors from the lab. Her homework mysteriously disappeared from her desk, making her look unprepared in front of teachers. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker, questioning whether she really belonged at Westfield. The worst part wasn't the pranks or the whispered insults. It was the loneliness. Sarah had always been independent, even preferring her own company most of the time, but being actively excluded felt like being trapped in a glass box, able to see the normal teenage life happening around her, but unable to participate. Her grades remained excellent, which seemed to irritate Madison and her friends even more. In a school where being smart was expected but not necessarily celebrated, Sarah's obvious intelligence, combined with her outsider status, made her a target for a particular kind of resentment. "It's so unfair," Sarah overheard Madison complaining to her friends near the lockers. "She probably gets tutoring from all those scholarship programs. It's not like she's actually smarter than us." That afternoon, Sarah found herself alone in the library, trying to focus on homework, but failing as tears of frustration blurred her vision. She had worked so hard to get here, had sacrificed social time, and sleep to maintain the grades necessary for her scholarship. Her mother had given up her own dreams of going back to school to support this opportunity. And for what? To be treated like she didn't belong, like her presence was somehow contaminating their perfect world? The librarian, Mrs. Chun, noticed Sarah's distress and approached her table. "Rough day?" she asked gently. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm Fina." "You know," Mrs. Chun said, settling into the chair across from her, "I came to Westfield as a scholarship student too, many years ago. It gets easier." "Did it really?" Sarah asked, looking up hopefully. Mrs. Chun considered the question carefully. "The external things got easier. I learned how to navigate the social dynamics, how to dress, and speak in ways that helped me fit in. But the real change came when I stopped trying to prove I belonged here and started believing it myself. What if I don't belong here?" Sarah whispered. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Chun said with a knowing smile. "Something tells me you belong here more than you realize. Sometimes the people who work hardest to make us feel small are the ones who are most afraid of what we might become." As Sarah packed up her books that evening, Mrs. Chin's words echoed in her mind. She thought about her mother, working double shifts to help support their family, never complaining about the exhaustion or the difficult patients. She thought about her younger brother Carlos, who looked up to her with such pride when she told him about her classes. She thought about all the dreams her family had pinned on this opportunity. Madison Ashworth and her friends didn't know the real Sarah Martinez. They saw only what they wanted to see, a poor girl who didn't belong in their world. But Sarah was beginning to understand that there might be more to her story than even she fully realized. That night, as she sat at the small desk in her bedroom, surrounded by textbooks and the sound of traffic from the street below, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't let them break her. She wouldn't give up on this opportunity that had cost her family so much. Whatever it took, she would find a way to survive at Westfield Academy. She had no idea that survival would soon become the least of her concerns, and that the very people trying to destroy her would soon be begging for her forgiveness. The truth about Sarah Martinez was more extraordinary than any of them could imagine, and it was about to change everything. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for another day of enduring Westfield Academy's social minefield. She stood in front of the mirror in her tiny bedroom, practicing the neutral expression she had perfected over the past few weeks. Not too sad, which would invite more targeting, but not too confident, which might be seen as uppity. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Remember, Mija, they can only make you feel small if you let them. You are stronger than you know." Sarah smiled despite herself. Her mother always seemed to know exactly when she needed encouragement. Maria Martinez might work in housekeeping and laundry at the hospital now, but she had dreams once too. Sarah was determined not to let those dreams die in the hallways of Westfield Academy. The school day started typically enough, with Sarah navigating the crowded hallways while trying to avoid Madison's group. She had developed a sixth sense about their movements, able to detect their approach by the particular pitch of their laughter and the way other students automatically made space for them to pass. During lunch, Sarah sat alone again, this time bringing a sandwich from home to avoid the cafeteria line, where she inevitably encountered Madison's commentary about proper nutrition and how the other half lives. She was reading a biography of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor when a shadow fell across her table. "Mind if I sit?" The voice belonged to David Kim, a quiet boy from her chemistry class who usually kept to himself. Sarah looked up, surprised. In 3 weeks at Westfield, no one had voluntarily chosen to sit with her. "Sure," she said cautiously. David settled across from her with his lunch tray. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble. "For what?" "For not saying anything when they put gum in your hair. For watching and not helping when your homework disappeared. For being a coward, basically." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of sarcasm or some elaborate setup for another humiliation. But David's expression was genuinely remorseful. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because what they're doing isn't okay, and because I know what it's like to be the outsider here." David picked at his salad, not meeting her eyes. "My family immigrated here when I was 10. We weren't poor, but we weren't Westfield rich either. It took me 2 years to figure out how to fit in, and I guess I forgot what it felt like to be on the outside." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, Sarah processing this unexpected ally. Finally, she spoke. "What made you decide to sit with me today?" David smiled for the first time. "Madison made some comment about charity cases in chemistry, and it reminded me why I used to hate this place before I learned to blend in. I guess I realized I liked who I was better when I wasn't trying so hard to be someone else." For the first time since arriving at Westfield, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she wouldn't have to navigate this alone after all. But Madison Ashworth was watching from across the cafeteria, her blue eyes narrowing as she observed Sarah's first social connection at Westfield. The game was about to change, and Sarah had no idea how high the stakes were about to become. Madison Ashworth was not accustomed to being ignored, and Sarah Martinez's growing resilience was becoming a problem that required a more direct approach. The fact that David Kim had chosen to sit with the scholarship girl was particularly galling. David was exactly the kind of smart, quiet student that Madison's circle usually dismissed but never actively targeted. His defection suggested that Sarah might be more dangerous than Madison had initially calculated. That afternoon, Madison called an emergency meeting of her inner circle in the bathroom adjacent to the main lobby. The space was as luxurious as everything else at Westfield, with marble countertops and individual powder rooms that provided privacy for the kind of conversation Madison had in mind. "We have a situation," Madison announced as soon as the last member of her group arrived. There was Emma Rothschild, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the city, Jessica Park, daughter of a tech billionaire, and Amanda Collins, whose mother was a federal judge, and whose father ran a hedge fund. The new girl, Emma asked, applying lip gloss with the kind of precision that suggested hours of practice. She's not going away quietly like she's supposed to, Madison replied, her perfect composure showing the first cracks of irritation. And now David Kim is sitting with her. If she starts collecting allies, this whole thing becomes much more complicated. Jessica looked up from her phone, where she had been scrolling through social media. What exactly are we worried about? She's a scholarship kid from downtown. It's not like she can actually challenge us. Madison's expression darkened. This was exactly the kind of thinking that made her friends useful followers, but poor strategists. They saw only the surface, Sarah's second-hand clothes, her careful budget, her obvious outsider status. But Madison had been watching more carefully, and what she saw concerned her. Sarah Martinez was smart. Not just book smart, which was common enough at Westfield, but strategically intelligent. She had adapted quickly to the school's academic demands. And, more importantly, she had started learning how to navigate the social landscape. The friendship with David Kim was proof of that. She was building alliances with other students who didn't quite fit Madison's mold. She's getting comfortable, Madison explained patiently. And comfortable people get bold. Bold people ask questions. And there are certain questions we don't want anyone asking. The truth was, Madison's position at Westfield was more precarious than her friends realized. Yes, her family name was on one of the buildings, but that building had been donated by her great-grandfather, not her current family. The Ashworth family fortune had been slowly declining for years, maintained more by reputation and careful financial management than by actual wealth. Madison's tuition was paid, but barely, and any serious investigation into the family's current circumstances might reveal some uncomfortable truths. Sarah Martinez represented chaos. She was an unknown variable in a carefully controlled environment, and Madison had built her entire identity around controlling the environment. So what do we do? Amanda asked, always eager for drama. Madison smiled, but there was nothing warm about the expression. We remind everyone exactly why Westfield Academy has standards. Some people belong here, and some people don't. It's time to make that distinction crystal clear. The plan Madison outlined was more sophisticated than their previous efforts. Instead of obvious bullying that teachers might notice, they would use the school's own systems against Sarah. Madison had connections everywhere. Her mother served on the board of trustees, her older brother was a recent alumnus who stayed in touch with current faculty, and Madison herself had cultivated relationships with key administrative staff through years of strategic charm. The first strike came during Sarah's European history class. Mrs. Patterson, the teacher, announced a major research project that would count for 30% of their grade. Students were required to work in groups of 4, and the groups would be assigned based on a careful balance of academic strengths and leadership potential. When the group assignments were posted, Sarah found herself paired with 3 students she barely knew. Marcus Webb, who rarely spoke in class and seemed to coast on minimum effort. Clarissa Thompson, who was pleasant enough but more interested in her social media following than in academics. And Trevor Bryant, whose main claim to fame was being captain of the lacrosse team and whose academic performance was mediocre at best. Sarah stared at the list, realizing immediately what had happened. The other groups were balanced with at least 1 or 2 strong students. Her group was clearly designed to fail, and she would be dragged down with them. Meanwhile, Madison's group included David Kim, Emma Rothschild, and Jonathan Hayes, one of the most academically gifted students in their class. It was a dream team designed for success, and Madison made sure to catch Sarah's eye when the assignments were announced, offering a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. The project required extensive research into the causes and consequences of World War I, with a final presentation to the class and a written report that would be graded both individually and as a group. Sarah quickly realized that her teammates had no intention of doing serious work. "It's just a presentation," Marcus said when they met for their first planning session. "How hard can it be? We'll throw together some slides the night before." "Actually, Mrs. Patterson is pretty strict about these things," Sarah said carefully. I think we should start researching now and divide up the work fairly. Look, Trevor interrupted, some of us have actual commitments. I have lacrosse practice every day after school, and Clarissa has modeling shoots on weekends. Maybe you could handle the heavy lifting since you probably don't have much else going on. The assumption stung, but Sarah kept her expression neutral. I'm happy to do my share, but this is supposed to be a group project. We all need to contribute if we want a good grade. Clarissa looked up from her phone for the first time. My dad always says that successful people know how to delegate. Consider this a learning experience. Sarah left the meeting feeling trapped. She could either do all the work herself and let her teammates coast to a good grade, or she could insist on equal participation and risk the project failing when they inevitably let her down. Neither option was fair, but fairness was clearly not a consideration in Madison's world. That evening, Sarah called her mother from the public library downtown, where she had gone to start researching the project. She needed the library's extensive database access, and she also needed distance from Westfield's environment to think clearly. Mija, you sound tired, Maria said as soon as she answered the phone. I'm tired, Mom. I'm tired of fighting for every little thing. I'm tired of being treated like I don't belong. Tell me what happened. Sarah explained the situation with the group project, careful not to make it sound too much like whining. Her mother listened without interrupting, asking only occasional questions for clarification. So what are you going to do? Maria asked finally. I guess I'll do the whole project myself. It's the only way to guarantee a good grade. Is that what you want to do? Sarah considered the question. No, I want to tell them all to go to hell and transfer back to Lincoln High. Maria laughed, and the sound was warm and understanding. But you're not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. Why not? It was a question Sarah had been asking herself every day since arriving at Westfield. Why was she subjecting herself to this treatment? Why was she working so hard to succeed in a place that clearly didn't want her? Because giving up now means they win, Sarah said finally. And because you and Carlos believe in me, even when I don't believe in myself. There's another reason too, her mother said softly. What's that? Because you know you belong there, even if they don't see it yet. And sometimes, Mija, we have to fight for our place in the world, not because it's easy, but because it's ours. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the library's quiet study area and thought about her mother's words. Maria Martinez had immigrated to the United States at age 16, speaking minimal English and carrying nothing but determination and dreams for a better life. She had worked her way through nursing school while raising 2 children as a single mother, never complaining about the double shifts or the exhaustion. Sarah had inherited more than her mother's determination. She had inherited something else too, something she had never fully understood or explored. But sitting in a library, surrounded by books and the quiet dignity of learning, she began to realize that her story might be more complicated than even she knew. The next few days brought a series of escalating challenges clearly orchestrated by Madison and her friends. Sarah's locker combination was changed mysteriously, leaving her locked out during lunch period. Her name was left off the list for a mandatory assembly, causing confusion and making her late to her next class. Small things, individually but collectively designed to make her feel unwelcome and off balance. The worst incident came on a Thursday afternoon during chemistry lab. Sarah was working alone, as usual, when she reached for a beaker of what should have been water for her experiment. The liquid was clear and odorless, but when she poured it into her mixture, the reaction was immediate and dramatic. The solution turned bright green and began bubbling violently, producing a smell so foul that half the class began coughing and covering their noses. Miss Martinez, Mr. Rodriguez, the chemistry teacher, hurried over to her station. What did you add to that mixture? Just water, Sarah said, genuinely confused. I took it from the beaker labeled H2O. Mr. Rodriguez examined the beaker and frowned. This isn't water. This is a sodium hydroxide solution. He looked at Sarah suspiciously. Mixing this with your experiment could have caused serious injury if you had been careless about ventilation. But I didn't, Sarah began, then stopped as she caught sight of Madison across the room. Madison was watching with an expression of perfect innocence, but there was something in her eyes that looked like satisfaction. I'll need to write this up as a safety violation, Mr. Rodriguez continued. 3 safety violations result in removal from the course. Sarah's heart sank. Chemistry was required for graduation, and, more importantly, it was one of her strongest subjects. She had planned to pursue a science-related major in college, and losing chemistry would derail those plans entirely. After class, as Sarah was packing up her materials with shaking hands, David Kim approached her station. "That wasn't water," he said quietly. "I know that now," Sarah replied, trying to keep the tears of frustration out of her voice. "I mean, I saw Madison switch the beakers before you came to lab. I should have said something, but I was afraid. You saw her switch them?" Sarah looked up sharply. David nodded miserably. "I'm sorry. I was going to warn you, but she did it right as Mr. Rodriguez started talking, and then it was too late." For the first time since arriving at Westfield, Sarah felt something stronger than hurt or confusion. She felt anger. Pure, clean anger that cut through all the self-doubt and uncertainty like a blade. Madison Ashworth had just crossed a line from social exclusion to academic sabotage. She wasn't just trying to make Sarah feel unwelcome anymore. She was actively trying to destroy Sarah's future. That night, Sarah sat at her small desk and wrote 2 letters. The first was to her mother, explaining what had happened and asking for advice about whether to report the incident to the administration. The second was a letter she never intended to send, addressed to Madison Ashworth, explaining exactly what Sarah thought of her tactics and her character. Writing the second letter felt good, even though she tore it up as soon as she finished. It reminded her that she had a voice, even if she hadn't been using it. But as she prepared for bed that night, Sarah realized something important had changed. The girl who had been trying so hard to blend in and avoid confrontation was disappearing. In her place was someone stronger, someone who was tired of being pushed around. Madison Ashworth thought she was dealing with a frightened scholarship student who would eventually break under pressure. She had no idea that she had just awakened something in Sarah Martinez that had been sleeping for too long. The real fight was about to begin, and Sarah was going to be ready for it. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather, and Sarah dressed carefully for school. Instead of her usual strategy of trying to blend in, she chose clothes that made her feel confident. A crisp white button-down shirt, dark jeans, and the one pair of good shoes her mother had bought her for special occasions. She arrived at school early and went directly to the library, where Mrs. Chun was setting up for the day. "You're here early," Mrs. Chun observed, looking up from her computer. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said. "When you were a scholarship student here, did anyone ever try to sabotage your work?" Mrs. Chin's expression grew serious. "What happened?" Sarah told her about the chemistry incident, about David's observation, about the pattern of harassment that had been escalating for weeks. Mrs. Chin listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each detail. "Have you reported any of this to the administration?" she asked when Sarah finished. "I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Madison's family is important here, and I'm nobody." Mrs. Chun stood up and walked to one of the tall windows overlooking the main courtyard. Students were beginning to arrive for the day, their voices carrying across the lawn as they greeted friends and settled into their familiar social groups. "Sarah," she said finally, "there's something you should know about Westfield Academy. This school was built on the principle that excellence comes from diversity, not just racial or economic diversity, but diversity of perspective and experience. The founders believed that bringing together students from different backgrounds would create better leaders for the future." "That's a nice idea," Sarah said, "but it doesn't feel very diverse when scholarship students get targeted for not fitting in." "You're right, and that's exactly why this behavior cannot be tolerated." Mrs. Chun turned back to face Sarah. "I'm going to help you document everything that's happened, and we're going to present it to Dr. Harrison." Dr. Harrison was the headmaster of Westfield Academy, a woman Sarah had only seen from a distance during school assemblies. The thought of sitting in her office, and accusing Madison Ashworth of systematic harassment was terrifying. "What if she doesn't believe me?" Sarah asked. "Then we'll make sure we have enough evidence that belief isn't required," Mrs. Chun replied firmly. "But I think you'll find that Dr. Harrison takes these matters very seriously. She's been trying to change the culture here for years, and she needs students like you to be brave enough to speak up." That afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting in Dr. Harrison's office, a spacious room lined with bookshelves and decorated with artwork from current students. The headmaster was younger than Sarah had expected, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Chun had insisted on accompanying Sarah to the meeting, and she sat beside her as Sarah recounted the weeks of harassment, culminating in the chemistry incident. Dr. Harrison listened carefully, taking notes and asking occasional questions for clarification. When Sarah finished, the office fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. "These are serious accusations," Dr. Harrison said finally. "Academic sabotage is grounds for expulsion, regardless of a student's family connections or financial contributions to the school." "I don't want anyone to be expelled," Sarah said quickly. "I just wanted to stop." "I appreciate that sentiment, Miss Martinez, but what you're describing goes far beyond typical teenage conflict. If Madison Ashworth deliberately tampered with laboratory materials, she endangered not just your academic standing, but potentially your physical safety." Dr. Harrison leaned forward in her chair. "I want you to know that I take full responsibility for the fact that this situation was allowed to escalate as far as it has. We pride ourselves on creating an inclusive environment, but clearly we've failed in your case." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we investigate thoroughly and take appropriate action. In the meantime, I want you to document any further incidents immediately and report them to Mrs. Chun or directly to me." Dr. Harrison's expression softened slightly. "And Sarah, I want you to know that you belong here. Your academic performance has been exemplary, and your teachers have nothing but positive things to say about your work ethic and character." As Sarah left the headmaster's office, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. For the first time since arriving at Westfield, an adult in authority had listened to her and taken her concerns seriously. But she also knew that confronting Madison directly was just the beginning. The real test would come in the days ahead, when Madison realized that her tactics had been exposed and that Sarah was no longer an easy target. The war for Sarah's place at Westfield Academy was about to enter a new phase, and both sides were preparing for battle. What neither Madison nor Sarah realized was that this conflict would soon reveal secrets that would change everything they thought they knew about power, privilege, and where Sarah Martinez truly belonged in the world. Dr. Harrison's investigation began immediately, and Madison Ashworth quickly realized that her carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. The headmaster's approach was methodical and thorough, starting with security camera footage from the chemistry lab and expanding to include interviews with teachers, students, and staff members who might have witnessed the pattern of harassment. Madison sat in her bedroom that Friday evening, staring at her phone and weighing her options. Her mother, Catherine Ashworth, was at another charity gala downtown, the kind of event where the family needed to maintain appearances even as their bank account dwindled. Madison had perfected the art of managing their social calendar, ensuring they attended just enough high-profile events to maintain their status, while avoiding the expenses that could expose their financial difficulties. The call she was contemplating making was risky, but Madison was running out of alternatives. Her uncle James worked in the school district administrative office, and he had helped the family navigate previous difficult situations. But this felt different. Dr. Harrison wasn't the kind of administrator who could be influenced by donations or family connections, and Madison had heard rumors that the headmaster was actively trying to change Westfield's culture. Before she could make the call, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma Rothschild's name. "Madison, we need to talk." Emma's voice was tight with anxiety. "Dr. Harrison called my parents today." Madison's blood turned cold. If the investigation had expanded to include her friends, the situation was more serious than she had anticipated. "What does she want?" Madison asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. She wanted to know about the chemistry lab incident and about any interactions I'd witnessed between you and Sarah Martinez. "Madison, they have security footage. They know about the beaker switch." The phone slipped in Madison's suddenly sweaty hand. She had assumed the camera angles in the chemistry lab wouldn't capture her actions, but apparently she had miscalculated. "What did you tell them?" Madison asked. "I told them I didn't remember anything specific," Emma replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "But, Madison, my parents are furious. They said if I get involved in some harassment scandal, it could affect my college applications. They're talking about transferring me to another school." After Emma hung up, Madison sat in the gathering darkness of her room and faced the reality that her reign at Westfield Academy might be coming to an end. Everything she had worked to build, every relationship she had cultivated, every carefully maintained advantage was at risk because of one scholarship student who refused to know her place. Meanwhile, Sarah Martinez was experiencing Westfield Academy from an entirely new perspective. Word of Dr. Harrison's investigation had spread through the school's informal networks, and suddenly, students who had previously ignored her were offering tentative smiles in hallways. Teachers who had seemed distant before were engaging her in conversations about her academic interests and future plans. The change was most noticeable in her classes. Without the constant stress of wondering when the next humiliation would come, Sarah found herself participating more actively in discussions and feeling confident enough to share her ideas. Her European history teacher, Mrs. Patterson, approached her after class on Monday morning. "Miss Martinez, I've been reviewing the preliminary work for your group project," Mrs. Patterson said. "Your research methodology is quite sophisticated. Have you considered pursuing history in college?" Sarah was surprised by the question. She had been so focused on surviving high school that she hadn't given much thought to specific college majors. "I hadn't really decided," she admitted. "I've been thinking about science or maybe pre-law." "Well, whatever you choose, you clearly have the analytical skills to succeed in higher education. I wanted you to know that if you need a recommendation letter for college applications, I'd be happy to provide one." The offer meant more to Sarah than Mrs. Patterson could have realized. College recommendations from Westfield Academy teachers carried significant weight with admissions committees, and having a faculty advocate could make the difference between acceptance and rejection at competitive universities. During lunch, Sarah found herself sitting with David Kim again, but this time they were joined by two other students, Jennifer Walsh, a quiet girl from her calculus class, and Marcus Rodriguez, who was on the debate team. The conversation flowed easily as they discussed everything from weekend plans to their thoughts on the upcoming student government elections. "You should run for something," Jennifer suggested to Sarah. "Student council or maybe class representative. You'd be good at it." "I don't think I'm ready for anything like that," Sarah replied quickly. The idea of putting herself forward for elected office seemed presumptuous, especially given how recently she had been a complete outsider. "Why not?" Marcus asked. "You obviously care about making this place better, and you're not afraid to speak up when something's wrong. Those are exactly the qualities we need in student leadership." As Sarah walked home that afternoon, she reflected on how dramatically her experience at Westfield had changed in just a few days. The investigation had shifted the balance of power, at least temporarily, and she was getting a glimpse of what her school experience might have been like if she had been welcomed from the beginning. But she also knew that the investigation's outcome would determine whether this new dynamic was permanent or just a brief respite. If Madison and her friends were exonerated or received only minimal consequences, Sarah's position might become even more precarious than before. Dr. Harrison's investigation continued throughout the week, and the evidence against Madison and her circle was mounting. The security footage from the chemistry lab clearly showed Madison switching the water beaker with a sodium hydroxide solution while Sarah was at the supply cabinet. Interviews with other students revealed a pattern of exclusion and harassment that went back to Sarah's first day at school. More damaging still, the investigation had uncovered other incidents involving Madison's group targeting students they deemed unworthy of Westfield's social elite. A sophomore named Alex Chun had been systematically excluded from study groups after it was revealed that his family owned a restaurant rather than a multinational corporation. A junior named Maria Santos had found her college counseling appointments mysteriously canceled after Madison complained to the guidance office about certain students receiving unfair advantages in the application process. On Thursday morning, Madison received a call requesting her presence in Dr. Harrison's office at 2 p.m. that afternoon. She knew it was the end of her time at Westfield Academy, but she was determined to maintain her dignity and protect her family's reputation as much as possible. The meeting was formal and brief. Dr. Harrison presented the evidence methodically, including time-stamped security footage and written statements from multiple witnesses. Madison's parents had been called and were expected to arrive within the hour. "Miss Ashworth," Dr. Harrison said, "the evidence clearly shows that you deliberately endangered another student's safety and attempted to sabotage her academic performance. This behavior violates every principle upon which Westfield Academy was founded." Madison sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, maintaining the composure she had been taught from childhood. She had prepared a speech about misunderstandings and teenage drama, but looking at Dr. Harrison's stern expression, she realized that denials would only make the situation worse. "I understand," Madison said simply. "Do you? Because I'm not sure you understand the full impact of your actions." Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "Sarah Martinez came to this school with exceptional academic credentials and genuine intellectual curiosity. She should have been welcomed as an asset to our community. Instead, she has spent months fighting for basic respect while maintaining academic performance that exceeds that of most of her peers." The words stung because they were true. Madison had been so focused on maintaining her own status that she had never considered Sarah as an individual person with her own goals and challenges. "What happens now?" Madison asked. "You are suspended immediately pending a disciplinary hearing with the Board of Trustees. The hearing will determine whether you are permanently expelled or allowed to return under strict conditions." Madison's parents arrived an hour later, and the meeting with Dr. Harrison was painful and humiliating. Catherine Ashworth's carefully maintained facade cracked as she realized that her daughter's behavior had jeopardized not only Madison's education, but also the family's standing in the community. That evening, news of Madison's suspension spread through Westfield's social networks like wildfire. Some students expressed shock and disbelief that someone from such a prominent family could be held accountable for their actions. Others quietly celebrated what they saw as long overdue justice for Madison's victims. Sarah learned about the suspension from David Kim, who texted her after school. Her first reaction was not triumph, but a strange sense of sadness. She had never wanted to destroy Madison's life. She had just wanted the harassment to stop. That night, Sarah's mother noticed her daughter's subdued mood as they prepared dinner together in their small kitchen. "Something's bothering you, Mija," Maria observed. "I thought you'd be relieved that this girl is being held accountable." "I am relieved," Sarah said, chopping vegetables with unnecessary force. "But I also feel guilty. What if she gets expelled? What if this ruins her chances for college?" Maria stopped stirring the pot and turned to face her daughter. "Sarah, what that girl did to you was cruel and dangerous. The consequences she's facing are the result of her own choices, not yours." "I know that logically," Sarah replied, "but I keep thinking about how scared she must be right now and how her parents must feel." Maria smiled and touched her daughter's cheek gently. "You know what this tells me about you? It tells me that you have a good heart and strong character. But don't mistake kindness for responsibility. You are not responsible for fixing the problems that other people create." The next day at school, Sarah noticed the dramatic shift in social dynamics that Madison's absence had created. Emma Rothschild and the other members of Madison's circle seemed lost without their leader, unsure how to navigate the hallways without their usual confident swagger. Other students who had been on the periphery of the popular group were reassessing their allegiances and looking for new social connections. During lunch, Sarah was surprised to find Emma standing beside her table, looking nervous and uncertain. "Can I talk to you?" Emma asked quietly. Sarah looked up from her book, studying Emma's face for signs of hostility or deception. Instead, she saw something that looked like genuine remorse. "Sure," Sarah said, gesturing to an empty chair. Emma sat down carefully, as if the chair might collapse under her. "I wanted to apologize," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything. For not stopping Madison, for participating in the harassment, for being a coward when I should have stood up for what was right." Sarah waited for the but or the excuse that usually followed apologies like this. Instead, Emma continued with raw honesty. "I was afraid of losing my place in the group, of becoming a target myself. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. And I wanted you to know that what Madison did in the chemistry lab, I had no idea she was planning that. If I had known, I would have stopped her." "Do you really mean that?" Sarah asked. Emma met her eyes directly. "Yes, I do. I may be a lot of things, but I'm not okay with putting someone in physical danger over social politics." They sat in silence for a moment, and Sarah found herself genuinely considering whether Emma's apology was sincere. There was something different about her demeanor, a vulnerability that Sarah had never seen before. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "I'm supposed to testify at Madison's disciplinary hearing next week. My parents have made it very clear that I need to tell the truth about everything I witnessed, regardless of the impact on Madison or our friendship." "And how do you feel about that?" "Terrified," Emma said with a short laugh, "but also relieved. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not just to maintain my social status." Over the following days, more of Madison's former followers approached Sarah with their own apologies and confessions. Some seemed genuine in their remorse, while others appeared to be primarily concerned with protecting themselves from the ongoing investigation. Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of having to decide which relationships were worth rebuilding and which people she could trust. The most surprising conversation came from Jessica Park, who had been one of Madison's most loyal supporters. Jessica found Sarah in the library after school and sat down without being invited. "I need to tell you something," Jessica said, looking around to make sure they weren't overheard. "About Madison and why she targeted you specifically." Sarah looked up from her homework, suddenly alert. "What do you mean?" "Madison wasn't just upset about having a scholarship student at Westfield. She was specifically threatened by you because of something she found out about your background." "What could she possibly have found out?" "I'm exactly what I appear to be, a girl from downtown whose mother works at a hospital." Jessica shook her head. "That's what Madison thought at first, too. But then she started digging into your family history for some reason, maybe trying to find something to use against you. What she found scared her more than anything else." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Her family had always been private about their background, and her mother had been evasive whenever Sarah asked about their extended family or their life before immigrating to the United States. "What did she find?" Sarah asked quietly. "I don't know all the details," Jessica admitted, "but it had something to do with your mother's maiden name and your family's history in Mexico. Madison said something about your family being more connected than they pretend to be. She was worried that if certain people found out who you really were, it would change how everyone saw the social hierarchy at Westfield." That evening, Sarah confronted her mother about Jessica's revelation. They sat in their small living room after Carlos had gone to bed, and Sarah asked directly about their family history for the first time in years. Maria Martinez looked at her daughter for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Mija," she said finally, "there are some things about our family that I have kept private to protect you and your brother. But maybe it's time you knew the truth about who you are and where you come from." As her mother began to speak, Sarah realized that her entire understanding of her identity was about to change. The girl who had been fighting for acceptance as a scholarship student from a working-class family was about to discover that her real story was far more complex than anyone at Westfield Academy could have imagined. The revelation would not only change Sarah's understanding of herself, but would also transform the entire dynamic at Westfield Academy in ways that no one could have predicted. The investigation into Madison's harassment had uncovered more than just evidence of bullying. It had accidentally revealed a truth that would make Sarah Martinez one of the most important students ever to walk through Westfield's hallowed halls. But that night, sitting in her living room and listening to her mother's carefully chosen words, Sarah was simply a teenager learning that her family's past was both more complicated and more impressive than she had ever been allowed to know. The quiet scholarship student who had been targeted for not belonging was about to discover that she belonged at Westfield Academy in ways that went far beyond academic merit or financial aid. The truth about Sarah Martinez was about to change everything, and Madison Ashworth's attempt to destroy her would ironically be the catalyst that revealed just how wrong she had been about who deserved to be at Westfield Academy. Maria Martinez walked to the small bookshelf in their living room and pulled out a worn leather photo album that Sarah had seen countless times, but never been allowed to examine closely. Her mother sat back down and opened it carefully as if the contents might disintegrate if handled roughly. "Your full name is Sarah Elena Martinez de Carrera," Maria began, her voice taking on a formal tone that Sarah had never heard before. "The de Carrera part has always been there, but we haven't used it since we came to this country." Sarah leaned forward to look at the first page of the album, which showed a young woman who looked remarkably like her mother standing in front of an enormous hacienda surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. "That's your grandmother, Elena Carrera de Martinez, at her family estate in Guadalajara," Maria continued. "She was the daughter of Roberto Carrera, who owned one of the largest agricultural empires in Mexico and was a close advisor to several Mexican presidents." Sarah stared at the photograph, trying to process what her mother was telling her. The woman in the picture was wearing an elegant dress that probably cost more than their current monthly rent, and the house behind her looked like something from a movie about European royalty. "I don't understand," Sarah said slowly. "If our family was wealthy, why did you come here with nothing? Why are we living like this?" Maria turned the page to show more photographs. Family gatherings with dozens of well-dressed relatives. A young Maria in a school uniform at what appeared to be an exclusive private academy. Images of servants and luxury cars, and rooms filled with antique furniture. "Your grandfather, Roberto Carrera, made some powerful enemies in the 1990s, Maria explained. He refused to do business with certain cartels who wanted to use his agricultural operations to launder money. When I was 16, we received credible death threats against the entire family." The next few pages of the album showed newspaper clippings in Spanish, and Sarah could make out headlines about violence against prominent business families and the exodus of wealthy Mexicans to the United States during that period. "Roberto arranged for his children to leave Mexico immediately," Maria continued. "He stayed behind to try to protect the business and the workers who depended on us for their livelihoods. That was the last time I saw him alive." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "He was killed, along with your Uncle Eduardo and your Aunt Carmen. They tried to maintain the family operations despite the threats, believing they could find a way to coexist with the criminal organizations. They were wrong." Maria turned to a page that showed official-looking documents with government seals. "I came to the United States as a refugee, but the immigration officials didn't understand the complexity of our situation. On paper, I was just another Mexican teenager seeking economic opportunities. The truth about our family status and the reasons we fled couldn't be documented in ways that American bureaucracy could process. So you've been living like we're poor when we're actually—" Sarah trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "When we're actually the rightful heirs to a fortune that no longer exists and a legacy that could get us killed if the wrong people found out where we are," Maria completed. "Yes, Mija, that's exactly what we've been doing." Maria showed Sarah documents that had been carefully preserved in protective sleeves, birth certificates that listed elaborate family names, and addresses in exclusive neighborhoods, school records from institutions that Sarah recognized as some of Mexico's most prestigious academies, and legal papers that appear to be property deeds and business incorporation documents. The Carrera family trust still exists, Maria explained. It's managed by lawyers in Mexico City and Switzerland. Every year, I receive statements showing assets worth millions of dollars that I cannot touch without potentially exposing our location to people who might still want to harm us. Millions of dollars? Sarah repeated, struggling to reconcile this information with their current life of carefully budgeted grocery shopping and secondhand clothes. The agricultural business was sold after your grandfather's death, but the investments he made over the decades continue to generate income. There are properties in 6 countries, stock portfolios, art collections, and educational trusts that were established for future generations of the Carrera family. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where she had grown up. The knowledge that her mother had been living in voluntary poverty while sitting on a massive fortune was almost impossible to comprehend. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked, turning back to face her mother. "Because I wanted you and Carlos to grow up as normal American children," Maria replied. "I wanted you to understand the value of work and education, to appreciate what you had instead of taking privilege for granted. And because I was afraid that knowing about the money would change how you saw yourselves and your place in the world. But I've been taking charity," Sarah said, her voice rising with emotion. "I've been letting people treat me like I don't belong, like I'm lucky to be at Westfield because I'm some poor girl who got a scholarship. Do you have any idea how humiliating that's been?" Maria's expression grew stern. "Mija, what you've experienced at Westfield has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. Those children who treated you poorly would have found other reasons to exclude you if they had known about our family background. Wealth doesn't protect you from prejudice. It just changes the form it takes. But I could have stood up for myself differently if I had known the truth. Could you? Or would you have become just another privileged teenager who uses family money to solve problems instead of developing the strength to face them directly?" The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized that her mother had been conducting an elaborate social experiment with her own children as the subjects. They had been raised to believe they needed to earn their place in the world through merit and hard work, while secretly having access to resources that could have made their lives infinitely easier. "What happens now?" Sarah asked finally. "That depends on what you want to happen," Maria replied. "You could continue at Westfield as you are, knowing the truth but keeping it private. You could transfer to another school where your family background might make you more comfortable. Or you could stay and use this knowledge to help you navigate the social dynamics more effectively. What about the money? The trust funds and properties? They'll still be there when you turn 25, which is when the family trust allows access to inherited assets. Until then, nothing changes practically. We continue to live as we have been living." Sarah spent the next several days processing this information while trying to maintain her normal routine at school. Madison's disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, and Sarah had been asked to provide a written statement about her experiences. But now, knowing the truth about her background, she struggled with how to present herself in the official proceedings. The knowledge of her family's wealth and status was both liberating and burdensome. On one hand, it explained the quiet confidence that her mother had always carried, the way Maria Martinez could hold her own in conversations with doctors and administrators despite working in hospital maintenance. On the other hand, it made Sarah question whether her academic achievements and personal growth meant anything if they had been accomplished while living a lie. During lunch on Friday, David Kim noticed that Sarah seemed distracted and preoccupied. "You've been quiet this week," he observed. "Is everything okay? I know the whole Madison situation has been stressful." Sarah looked around the cafeteria, seeing her classmates with new eyes. Some of them came from families whose wealth was newer and smaller than what her own family had once possessed. Others had inherited their status without ever having to prove themselves academically or personally. And She was sitting among them as an equal, even though none of them knew it yet. "David," she said carefully, "what would you think if you found out that someone you knew wasn't exactly who they appear to be?" "In what way?" he asked, setting down his sandwich and giving her his full attention. "What if they had been pretending to be from a different background than they really were? Not lying exactly, but not telling the whole truth about their family or their circumstances?" David considered the question seriously. "I guess it would depend on why they were hiding the truth and whether it changed anything fundamental about who they were as a person. What if they were hiding the truth because they thought it would be safer, or because they wanted to be judged on their own merits instead of their family's reputation? Then I'd probably respect them more, not less," David replied. "It takes real character to succeed without relying on family advantages, even if those advantages were available." That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would change the trajectory of her life at Westfield Academy. She requested a meeting with Dr. Harrison, not to discuss Madison's case, but to provide additional context about her own background that might be relevant to the broader issues the investigation had uncovered. Dr. Harrison received her in the same office where they had discussed Madison's harassment, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Sarah felt nervous, but not powerless, uncertain, but not afraid. "Dr. Harrison," Sarah began, "there's something about my family background that I think you should know, especially as you're working to address the culture problems at Westfield." Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah provided a carefully edited version of her mother's story, focusing on the educational and cultural background that the Carrera family represented rather than the specific financial details. She explained that her family had chosen to live quietly in the United States while maintaining connections to their Mexican heritage and intellectual traditions. Dr. Harrison listened with growing interest, occasionally asking questions about specific details that clearly had broader implications for how she understood Westfield's student body and mission. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Harrison said when Sarah finished, "this information doesn't change anything about how we've handled the harassment you experienced, but it does provide valuable context for some broader initiatives I've been considering." "What kind of initiatives?" Westfield Academy was founded to bring together students from diverse backgrounds to create future leaders who understand different perspectives and cultures. Over the years, we've become too focused on economic diversity and lost sight of the intellectual and cultural diversity that our founders envisioned. Dr. Harrison leaned back at her chair, clearly thinking through the implications of what Sarah had shared. "Your presence here represents exactly the kind of student we should be actively recruiting. Someone with strong academic credentials, rich cultural heritage, and the character to succeed based on merit rather than family connections. The fact that you've been treated as an outsider says more about our failure to educate our existing students than it does about your qualifications to be here." "What does that mean for Madison's case?" Sarah asked. "It means that Madison's behavior represents a larger problem that we need to address systematically. This isn't just about one student harassing another. It's about the fundamental question of what Westfield Academy stands for and what kind of leaders we're trying to develop." When Sarah left Dr. Harrison's office that afternoon, she realized that her decision to reveal her family background had transformed her from a victim of harassment into a catalyst for institutional change. The shy scholarship student who had arrived at Westfield in September was evolving into someone who could bridge different worlds and help others understand that identity and worth couldn't be measured by superficial markers of status. But the real test would come on Monday, when Madison's disciplinary hearing would determine not just one student's fate, but the direction of Westfield Academy's future. Sarah's revelation about her background would play a crucial role in that process, though not in ways that anyone could have predicted. The quiet girl who had been targeted for not belonging was about to demonstrate that she belonged at Westfield Academy more than anyone had imagined, and that her presence there represented the best of what the school could be when it lived up to its founding principles. Madison Ashworth's attempt to exclude Sarah Martinez had inadvertently set in motion a series of events that would fundamentally change how Westfield Academy understood excellence, diversity, and the true meaning of educational privilege. The revelation was complete, but the transformation it would bring was just beginning. The disciplinary hearing for Madison Ashworth took place in Westfield Academy's boardroom, a formal space typically reserved for trustee meetings and major school decisions. The room's mahogany paneling and oil portraits of past headmasters created an atmosphere of institutional gravity that seemed to weigh on everyone present. Madison sat between her parents and their attorney, maintaining the composure she had been taught from childhood, but unable to hide the anxiety in her eyes. Across the table, Dr. Harrison presided over a panel that included two board members, the dean of students, and a parent representative who had been chosen specifically because she had no prior relationship with any of the families involved. Sarah had been asked to attend as a witness, and she sat in the gallery section with Mrs. Chun, who had requested permission to be present as Sarah's advocate. The formal setting made Sarah acutely aware of how much her life had changed since that first day when she had timidly introduced herself to Mrs. Wellington's literature class. Dr. Harrison began the proceedings by reading a comprehensive summary of the investigation's findings. The evidence was damning. Security footage of Madison switching the laboratory materials, documented patterns of social exclusion, testimony from multiple witnesses about systematic harassment, and evidence of Madison's attempts to sabotage Sarah's group project through administrative manipulation. But then Dr. Harrison introduced information that surprised everyone in the room, including Madison and her family. During the course of our investigation, Dr. Harrison said, "We discovered that this incident represents a broader failure on our part to properly orient our students to Westfield Academy's founding mission and core values. We also learned that our assessment of Miss Martinez's background was incomplete in ways that are relevant to this proceeding." Madison looked up sharply, confusion replacing some of the resignation in her expression. Dr. Harrison continued, "Westfield Academy was founded in 1923 by industrialist Theodore Westfield, who believed that American leadership in the 20th century would require individuals who could navigate different cultures, languages, and social contexts. The school was specifically designed to bring together students from established American families with students from distinguished international families who were living in the United States." The room was silent except for the scratching of the court reporter's pen as Dr. Harrison laid out the historical context that most current families had forgotten or never learned. Miss Martinez represents exactly the kind of student our founders envisioned when they created this institution. Her family, the Carreras, were prominent educators and civic leaders in Mexico for several generations before political circumstances required their relocation to the United States. Her presence here is not the result of charity or social experimentation, but rather a return to our original mission of bringing together students from different but equally distinguished backgrounds. Catherine Ashworth's face went pale as she began to understand the implications of what Dr. Harrison was saying. Madison looked as if she had been physically struck. "Miss Ashworth," Dr. Harrison addressed Madison directly, "your behavior toward Miss Martinez was not just personally cruel, but fundamentally contrary to everything Westfield Academy was created to accomplish. You attempted to exclude and humiliate a student whose family background and academic credentials make her one of the most qualified students ever to attend this institution." Madison's attorney leaned forward. "Dr. Harrison, with respect, my client's disciplinary issues should be evaluated based on her actions, not on subsequently discovered information about the victim's background." "You're absolutely right, Dr. Harrison replied. "Miss Ashworth's actions were reprehensible regardless of Miss Martinez's family history. But the broader context helps us understand the institutional failure that allowed this situation to develop." She turned back to Madison. "You have systematically harassed another student, endangered her physical safety, and attempted to sabotage her academic performance. In any context, these actions would warrant serious disciplinary measures. The additional irony that you targeted someone whose family has a stronger historical connection to Westfield's mission than your own simply underscores the severity of your misconduct." The hearing continued for another hour, with testimony from Emma Rothschild and other students who had witnessed Madison's behavior. Emma's testimony was particularly damaging because she provided specific examples of Madison's statements about Sarah's background and her deliberate attempts to rally other students to exclude her. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood up calmly and addressed the panel directly. "I want to say something about forgiveness," she began, her voice steady despite the formal setting. "What Madison did to me was wrong, and it could have seriously damaged my education and my future. But I also understand that she was acting based on assumptions about who belongs at Westfield and who doesn't." Madison looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes for the first time during the hearing. "I think Madison believed that Westfield Academy belonged to people like her, and that people like me were somehow taking something away from students who deserve to be here," Sarah continued. "But that's not how education works. Knowledge isn't diminished when it's shared, and excellence isn't weakened when more people achieve it." Sarah paused, looking around the room at the portraits of past headmasters and the symbols of institutional tradition. "I hope that whatever happens to Madison, Westfield Academy will use this experience to remember what it was originally created to do: bring together students from different backgrounds who can learn from each other and become better leaders because of that diversity." The panel deliberated for 30 minutes before returning with their decision. Madison would be suspended for the remainder of the semester and would be required to complete a comprehensive program on cultural competency and ethical leadership before being considered for readmission. She would also be required to write a formal apology to Sarah and to perform community service with organizations that served immigrant and refugee families. But Dr. Harrison had more to announce. The board has also voted to establish the Carrera-Martinez Fellowship for Cultural Leadership, she said, an annual award that will recognize students who demonstrate academic excellence while building bridges between different communities within our school. Sarah was stunned. Having a fellowship named after her family was an honor she had never imagined, and it represented a complete transformation in how Westfield Academy understood her place in the school community. After the hearing, Sarah found herself standing outside the boardroom with her mother, who had taken time off work to attend the proceedings. Maria Martinez looked proud, but not surprised by the day's developments. "How are you feeling, Mija?" her mother asked as they walked toward the parking lot. "Different," Sarah replied honestly. "Like I'm the same person, but everything around me has changed." "Not everything has changed," Maria said. "You're still the same girl who earned her way here through hard work and intelligence. You're still the same person who stood up for herself when it mattered. The only thing that's changed is that other people now understand what I've always known, that you belong wherever you choose to be." That evening, Sarah received a text message from an unexpected source, Madison Ashworth. "I know my apology letter is supposed to be formal, but I wanted to say something privately first. I was wrong about you, about what Westfield should be, about everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it yet. But I wanted you to know that I'm going to spend, however long it takes to become someone better than who I was. Thank you for showing me what real dignity looks like." Sarah read the message several times before responding. Everyone deserves the chance to become better than they were. I hope you find what you're looking for. Over the following months, Westfield Academy underwent a transformation that extended far beyond the resolution of Madison's case. Dr. Harrison launched a comprehensive review of the school's culture and curriculum, bringing in experts on inclusive education and cross-cultural communication. The school began actively recruiting students from diverse international backgrounds and created programming to help all students understand the global perspective that the founders had originally envisioned. Sarah found herself in an unusual position as both a catalyst for this change and a symbol of what Westfield could accomplish when it lived up to its best ideals. She was elected to student government in the spring, not because of her family background, but because of the leadership she had demonstrated throughout her first year. The Carrera-Martinez Fellowship became one of the most prestigious awards at Westfield Academy, attracting applicants from around the world who wanted to be part of an educational community that valued both academic excellence and cultural bridge building. Madison Ashworth returned to Westfield the following year as a different person. Her community service work had introduced her to immigrant families whose stories resembled Sarah's mother's experience, and she had developed a deeper understanding of privilege, prejudice, and responsibility. She and Sarah never became close friends, but they developed a respectful relationship based on mutual recognition of how much both of them had grown. Emma Rothschild emerged as one of Sarah's closest allies, using her family's social connections to support the cultural initiatives that Dr. Harrison was implementing. David Kim became student body president with Sarah as his vice president, and together they created programming that celebrated the diverse backgrounds of Westfield students while maintaining the academic rigor that had always defined the school. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The shy girl who had tried to blend into the background had evolved into someone who understood that true belonging came not from hiding who you were, but from being confident enough in your own worth to help others find their place as well. On graduation day, Sarah stood at the podium as valedictorian and looked out at an audience that included her mother, her brother Carlos, classmates from dozens of different backgrounds, and faculty members who had learned as much from the students as they had taught. 4 years ago, Sarah began, I came to Westfield Academy thinking that I needed to prove I belonged here. What I learned instead was that belonging isn't something you prove to other people. It's something you claim for yourself and then extend to others. She looked out at the sea of faces, including Madison Ashworth, who was graduating with honors and had been accepted to a prestigious university where she planned to study international relations. The real test of any community isn't whether it accepts people who are easy to include, but whether it becomes stronger by embracing people who challenge it to be better. Westfield Academy taught me that diversity isn't about charity or political correctness. It's about recognizing that excellence comes in many forms, and that our own achievements are greater when they're built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. As Sarah concluded her speech and looked out at the crowd, rising to give her a standing ovation, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had been targeted as the new girl had not only survived, but had transformed the institution that had initially rejected her. The revelation of her family background had changed everything, not because it made her more worthy of respect, but because it forced everyone around her to confront their assumptions about worth, belonging, and what it truly meant to be excellent. Sarah Martinez had claimed her place at Westfield Academy not through family connections or financial contributions, but through the much harder path of character, resilience, and the courage to remain true to herself even when others tried to diminish her. As she stepped down from the podium and accepted congratulations from classmates, teachers, and family members, Sarah realized that the most important lesson she had learned at Westfield had nothing to do with academic subjects or social dynamics. She had learned that the power to define yourself and your place in the world could never be taken away by others. It could only be surrendered. And Sarah Martinez had never surrendered. The scholarship student who had been targeted for not belonging had become a leader who helped others understand that everyone belonged somewhere, and that the best communities were those that made room for everyone to flourish. Her rank had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone had expected when the story began. The transformation was complete, but the impact would continue for generations of students who would benefit from the more inclusive, excellent institution that Westfield Academy had become because one teenager refused to accept that she didn't belong.